all of this, of all. Okay.
Sorry. Okay, you're good.
Am I good now? Thank you. All right, welcome back. The premise of this entire project from our perspective is to look at ways in which economic development finance agencies can become more engaged in developing their local food system through traditional finance approaches. These traditional finance approaches are things like tax-exempt bonds, tax increment finance, targeted finance, investment tools like new markets tax credits, opportunity zones, and then access to capital tools like revolving loan funds, mezzanine funds, loan guarantee programs, and credit enhancement. The idea being, why haven't we used normal traditional development finance tools to drive our food system the way that we've used those same tools to drive retail, manufacturing, redevelopment, housing, and all these other development needs? And so that's the premise of this. So Max, let's go to the next slide, please. We did some very basic, we like to say napkin type of research. And we just Googled, we just searched for a couple of months to see if we could find transactions that were using bonds and TIF and tax credits and revolving loan funds to drive food system finance. In just a matter of months, we found over $1 billion of transactions using our traditional tools. Now, that's just what we found. That's not the number. That's just one of those eye-opening, wow, there's a lot of places using our tools to drive the food system. Imagine a world where there was a more scientific or quantitative way to gather that data, and that number would probably be 20 or 30 times that number in terms of the real investment that's going into the food system using our tools. But it's very rarely talked about. And so our whole goal is to accelerate that and to magnify the great work that communities are doing to use traditional financing tools to drive the food system and then do more of it. So Max, next slide, please. When we look at development finance tools, there's four main categories: bedrock, targeted, investment, and access to capital. Bedrock tools are driven by bond financing. Bond financing is the heart and the bedrock of all development finance: roads, bridges, sewers, everything that you can think about. But bonds also finance manufacturers, first-time farmers, exempt facility, infrastructure, and nonprofits. All of these elements go into the food system. And so bonds can drive the food system. Targeted tools are tools like tax increment finance or special assessment. These tools create geographic financing opportunities. If you look into downtown Lincoln there, I can't remember the little name of the development down there, but that is all a TIF district driven by tax increment finance. If you look at most of the big public markets around the US, including ones in our home city of Columbus, but all the way down in Dallas, Texas, or in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, all of those big food districts with public markets and stalls for farmers to bring their crops and companies to sell their materials. Haymarket District, yeah, that's right, Tom, thank you. Those are all TIF districts. Those are all driven by a tool, a development finance tool, to encourage that activity. And if you look at the Haymarket District, what is it? Bars, restaurants, breweries, and that drives that whole economy down there. Investment tools are like new markets tax credits and opportunity zones. This is an example of where a traditional finance tool like new markets is used all over the place: for grocery stores, for food hubs, for accelerators, for minority farmers or beginning farmers. These tools are used to seek outside investment to help drive capital into areas where there isn't traditional financing offered. A lot of the grocery stores that you see go into low income or rural places largely have a new markets component behind them. And then access to capital tools. These are tools like revolving loan funds and mezzanine funds, tools that help to provide working capital to entrepreneurs, to small businesses, to first-time farmers, to food entrepreneurs, people that are trying to develop a product or a small business or a bakery or a farm. And that capital is really, really important because they need that resource to help grow their company. And oftentimes when you look at the food system, they're the hardest clientele to finance, even though they're just like any other traditional small business. Okay, Max, next slide, please. We then look at the components of the food system. This is our definition as designed by CDFA about 6 years ago. When you look at a food system, you can't just look at agriculture. You can't just look at restaurants. You've got to look at the entire system. So the food system is 6 components. Social enterprise. These are your organizations that are supporting, your social objectives, healthy food financing, access to affordable food, sustainable food. These groups are immensely important because while maybe they're not as important to me and my community, in other communities, these are desperately important to make sure that people have access to healthy food or food in general. And so these social enterprises play a huge role in designing and developing and supporting the food system. Then you have agriculture. This is your standard anywhere where there's production of agriculture. It's sort of regardless of location or size. It can be a small farm or it can be a large aquaponics operation. This includes the people that farm out in the sea and harvest seafood, or this can be people that operate in other types of farming operations. And of course, what matters with agriculture is that it can be done in the city, it can be done in the country, it can be done vertically, it can be done in water, it can be done in all different ways. And agriculture should be a big definition, not a narrow one. Then you have entrepreneurs. These are all the people that are taking food and trying to make a business out of it. This is your man or woman who's making hot sauce out of peppers and tomatoes, or this is somebody who is a restaurateur who's trying to start a new restaurant and trying to grow their empire. This could be anywhere from a farmer or someone who takes farmer byproducts and tries to make a value-added product off of the waste or off of the leftover parts and pieces. And so entrepreneurs are really important, and they're even more important today, just to what Tom and Kelly mentioned. Post-COVID, we need more entrepreneurs in the food space, more individual butchers and grocers, more people that are willing to be in the food space to help earn, to live their life and earn a living and create economy. Then you have industry. This can't be undersold. There's thousands of food manufacturers and processors around the country. These are your companies that take that food, that take that product and build it and make it into something. They process the food, they package the food. They might even store and co-label the food. They might do all sorts of different things, but industry is really, really important because you can't have agriculture if you don't have a place to take that product to have it processed and taken care of. Then you have your institutions. You guys have the University of Nebraska, obviously. We have the Ohio State University. These are major institutions. You have government, you have prisons, you have school systems, you have all these institutions that buy mass quantities of food. Imagine if you could support their efforts to shift their food purchasing local, or to help them be more sustainable, or to support more entrepreneurs through strategies and efforts that encourage more local and sustainable food. So institutions are immensely important. And then you have your infrastructure, like I talked about earlier. You can't just grow more of a product or create specialty products from your agriculture and your farmers. You have to have a way to transport it, store it, process it, and place it out into the market. This also includes all your networks that you have to develop, your networks of restaurants who want to buy locally sourced meats and vegetables and produce, and everything that goes into building that network, from technology to marketing to the physical plant that you need to be able to bring that all together. And so when you think about a food system, it isn't one of these, it's all 6 of them, and it includes the entire ecosystem. Max, next slide, please. And this is where it all comes together, right? This is where the food system, those 6 definitions you can see in the little circles, come together with financing. The tools that we've talked about, bedrock tools, targeted tools, investment tools, access to capital tools, they can all support every aspect of the food system. But what generally happens is that a community gets very narrow-minded. They use one tool to support the entire food system and end up not supporting any of the food system because they're not using that tool. And so all the tools holistically. So what we want you to do, and what we think SENDD is going to do under this plan, is to take a step back. They're going to look at their food system, and they're going to create and craft financing strategies to address the entire food system. All right, Max, next slide, please. When we look at development, we look at this topic, we go with the concept of reframe, build, plan. Matt, is this separated out, Angela? No, just this one slide? Okay, when you think about reframe, build, plan, this is the methodology we want SEND to think about as they're going through the process. They've already done it. Reframe the food system as development and infrastructure and economic development. Food is the same thing as a road, a bridge, a sewer. It's essential. And so if we frame it as infrastructure, and then we frame it as economic development, jobs, taxes, investment, don't forget that local money is money that multiplies more than money that goes outside of the community. And so food is absolutely economic development. Then building effective relationships and partnerships across the entire food system. SEND is doing this. This is their early steps with this plan and with what they're doing with us to begin to bridge all of those relationship gaps. You can't just bring all the foodies together and ask them for, what are your problems? And you can't bring the finance people together and say, what do you want to finance? You need to bring them both together. Make those substantive connections where food is introduced to finance and they know each other and they engage and they actually have substantive development between each other. And then plan, that's where SEND is. Create a plan for how you're going to strategically finance your food system. The plan is the way we operate. It's odd to me that communities have economic development plans, physical master plans, telecommunication plans, disaster recovery plans, all these other plans, but they don't have a food system plan. And in case of an emergency or tragedy or a pandemic, there's no plan in place for how they're going to support and encourage and catalyze the food system. And so this is the first step in it. Create a plan that says, here's how we're going to support our food system with both ideas and finance. Okay, Max, next slide. Which this brings us to us, brings us to you and the SEND Southeast Nebraska Development District strategic plan. And Angela is going to walk through some of these components of how we got to here. And then I'm going to come back and talk about some of the elements of the plan. So it's all you, Angela and Annie.
Okay, thank you. Yep, like Toby said, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about our process to put this plan together. We worked on it for about a year, and these were some of the main steps that we took to get to the final product. So we did create a working group made up of SEND and CDFA staff, as well as some food system stakeholders and development finance professionals from across the region. And we held 4 virtual working group meetings April through August of last year. And then we had an additional in-person meeting with the working group during our strategic planning session site visit in September, which I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later on. And the purpose of these meetings were really to help guide the planning process and inform our stakeholder engagement strategy and outreach, and then discuss the financing landscape within the Southeast Nebraska region. We also conducted 3 focus groups during July of 2022, and we pulled members for the focus group from a list of stakeholders that were provided by the working group, and to gain a better understanding of the current conditions for financing food-related businesses and projects in Southeast Nebraska. So our primary focus with these focus groups was learning which components of the food system needed further investment, what sources of capital were in greatest supply and in greatest demand, and then what types of barriers existed for accessing these resources. And the focus groups really helped to provide some insight about the current landscape of food system finance in the region. And we were able to use findings from the focus groups to help inform the programmatic framework that's outlined in the plan that we'll talk about here in a minute. And then finally, we did host a 2-day strategic planning session in person with SEND staff, board members, and then some external stakeholders from the community. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I did want to talk about the focus groups and go over some of the findings that we had from the questions that we asked for those meetings. So I will turn it over to Annie to go over those. And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. So like Angela said, we held these focus groups back last year in 2022. And we held 3 focus groups, and there was about 10 people in each one. And again, like Angela said, our goal of these focus groups was really to learn how development finance agencies can become more engaged in developing localized food systems through these traditional finance approaches. So we can just go ahead and jump into our first question. So you can go to the next slide. One more. There we go. All right. So we wanted to start by talking about the types of financing programs that are available to food and ag related businesses in the Southeast Nebraska region. And some of these examples of what we meant by financing programs were things like small business lending, grants, micro lending, tax credits, bond financing, the list kind of goes on there. So some of the programs that were mentioned were the Farm Service Agency, which is microloans for women and minority borrowers. Another common one was SBA, which is the Small Business Administration, which is funding for manufacturing businesses. And then we talked a little bit about statewide lending programs for beginning farmers as well. And kind of based on this information, it kind of led us to ask what they thought the region does best. And a lot of people said that Nebraska has a lot of robust programs, and they're not just limited to the region, but they're also available at the state level as well. And then we also had people mention how there's just a variety of financing and grant programs, such as the Community Development Block Grant Program. And this funded grocery stores to cities, villages, and counties who may have had a food desert or who don't really have retailers available in their community. And then there was also a lot of talk of business incentive or business finance programs available on the website. So I believe it's opportunity.nebraska.gov. And if you go on there, you can look at the financing programs that can assist with food products. So there was a lot of great conversation around what programs, are currently available and which ones people thought did best for the region. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the programs that were mentioned as some of the stronger ones in the region. So I won't go through and read all of them, but I think kind of some of the big ones that were mentioned were, the various USDA programs along the supply chain, the Nebraska Enterprise Fund, which is a statewide loan program. We also talked about FSA loans for farm ownership and maintenance, and then the Cooperative Development Foundation, which works more with tribal communities, but works to grow local food. All right, and then next slide. So then we started to kind of shift the discussion to the capital needs for food and ag related businesses in the region. So we kind of wanted to look where are the gaps in financing. So we had people mention that producers, sometimes just don't know where to look, or that they just need a little bit more assistance in developing or furthering their relationships with existing markets and or programs, or just finding new ones. People also said that lenders can, sometimes view food and ag businesses as risky investments because they may not have, enough of that educational background on the value of local food to the economy, which again is why education is a really important role in all of this, and making sure that, the food people are also connected with the financing people and vice versa. A lot of people mentioned that they simply just, need funding in order to create local supply chains, or that the terms just need to be a little bit more flexible for a lot of these programs, these lending programs more specifically. And then kind of relating to the same question, we wanted to know if there were any specific challenges or barriers in accessing capital. So if you go to the next slide. This kind of brings us back to the terms again, and just them needing to be more flexible, and how a lot of the requirements for lending programs are harder for these producers to meet, especially in rural areas, or simply they just haven't heard of a lot of these programs that currently exist. Again, price remains a big issue in a lot of this because there are a lot of competitors in the area, and then processing equipment and or the purchasing of equipment. And how there are not a lot of programs out there to help assist with this was another one. So next slide. So moving on to our next question, we kind of just wanted to see, what improvements you all would like to see regarding financing for food and ag related businesses. And some of the common answers that we saw were assistance with accessing federal funding. Again, working on those term requirements. So, removing or lowering the match component for USDA federal grant programs, and just making these lending programs a little bit more accessible for small businesses. And overall, again, just more education between economic development professionals and food system practitioners. So if you go to the next slide, our next question focuses a little bit on what role organizations like SEND could possibly play in addressing some of these gaps and or challenges. So we had folks mention how some of these organizations can maybe act more as take on like more of a leadership role in connecting programs and organizations. And overall, just having more conversation with stakeholders to apply for these programs was a big one. They also mention maybe becoming a one-stop shop for food system financing, providing more local food program assistance funds, again, having more educational opportunities, or maybe doing like a type of cross-training, because a lot of this information can come across as a little bit overwhelming for a lot of these producers. And then next slide, there we go. So our last question, we wanted to know if there was anything else about financing food system development in the Southeast Nebraska region that may have not been brought up yet. And a lot of the feedback was how there needed to be some more resources for rural communities and these small level producers. Again, education about, just the value of investing in local food system development and just really making some of these programs more sustainable and overall just, the terms on these programs and extending them. And then if there was any other significant barriers to accessing capital, we wanted to hear them. So if you go to the next slide. So there was a lot of talk about, the cost of land itself and just land availability in general. There's not always a lot of lenders that specialize in the ag space. There's often maybe a language barrier between folks, or just lack of access to technology was also a big barrier. So these really are just a few of the challenges that were mentioned, but it's definitely important to focus on these barriers so that we can try to solve some of the things when trying to, access capital within the food system space. So we really appreciate those that attended these focus groups and helped us out. And I will pass it back over to Angela and Toby to kind of talk more about the strategic planning session side of it all.
Okay. Thank you, Annie. We can pause here for a second. I just wanted to mention the strategic planning session that we held and go into a little bit more detail about this session. So it was a 2-day session with the SEND staff, board members, and external stakeholders back in September. And we had 3 different sessions within this, within the 2-day meeting. So we had a stakeholder forum, and that really included a broad cross-section of interested stakeholders. And it was more of a high-level overview of the project, discussion and feedback on the plan, the elements that we were considering, and then the focus groups as well. Then we met with the SEND board to present about the process for creating the plan and get them excited and on board and have a discussion with some feedback as well. And then finally, we met with the working group in person, and this was really an in-depth discussion about the process to date. And we reviewed the focus group findings, answered any questions, and then we really just dove into program development for this last session. So during this time, the group discussed, who SEND wants to serve in the region, how SEND is best suited to support food and agriculture related businesses, and then what our recommendations would be for improving access to capital within the region. And this conversation also covered SEND's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which allowed us to create a SWOT analysis that really shaped recommendations for SEND and informed the suggested timeline for action within the plan. So just as a reminder, strengths and weaknesses are internal initiatives that are well-performing or underperforming, and then opportunities and threats are external factors, either that present opportunities or problems for an organization. So I did want to go into just a little bit more detail about those. So next slide, please. Okay, so looking at the strengths and weaknesses for the plan, we did land on one of SEND's greatest strengths is definitely the staff and the board members. There's a lot of talent and dedication within the staff and support among the board members, and that really was apparent in those 2 days that we spent with these folks. There is definite expertise and willingness to act as a resource and help establish a positive impression for SEND in the region. Another strength that we found is SEND's regional approach, definitely to collaboration and connectivity within the region among organizations that are focusing on food system initiatives, like University of Nebraska that Toby mentioned earlier. And then another factor that helps SEND is definitely a forward-thinking mindset and willingness to identify possible gaps to advance the strategy and seek new opportunities to expand the regional food system. And then a couple of weaknesses that came up. There is definitely fragmentation among food system practitioners and economic development professionals in the region, which could result in some unmet needs in the food system. And then there's also really just limited knowledge about what programs currently exist and where to find them. I know Annie talked about that. It kept coming up in our focus group meetings, as well as just kind of that lack of knowledge about what is out there, where to find it, or how to access the programs that are available. And then also maintaining an active presence within a 16-member region or 16-member county region that SEND focuses on is difficult with a limited staff and could be a challenge and lead to unbalanced distribution of resources or really just the difficulty tailoring programs that can meet the specific needs of these rural counties. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay. So as far as opportunities and threats, so there are a lot of opportunities. There are a wide variety of programs and projects and activities that SEND can develop to reach these food systems goals. And since there is a need for further collaboration and connection among the food-focused community development finance institutions in the region, SEND can really act as the convener to bring together the right resources and parties. So that's another thing that Annie mentioned that kept coming up in the focus groups is really just someone to play that convener role or that one-stop shop for food system financing information. There's definitely, with the strong regional approach that SEND has, there's room for more engagement and partnerships and communication. And then some threats that need to be considered in implementing the strategic plan is there's a lot of organizations within the region, so there could be some competition with existing organizations and programs over capital resources. We did find that there are some current negative attitudes towards small agribusinesses and providing capital to those types of businesses. And then there was also some talk about the brain drain of younger folks that are moving out of the state, which presents a threat as well. So if we go to the next slide. So now I'll turn it back over to Toby. We're going to talk about really just the elements of the plan that we are focusing on, and that's programmatic, operations, and governments. And each section has specific goals and action items that we will talk about to advance the region's strategy and strengthen the food system. So I will turn it back over to Toby.
Okay, everybody. It's a lot of us talking, and I know it could be, a lot to take in. But here's really where you get to the meat of what you're trying to achieve here, and this is your core components of the plan. So most of our plans look like this. They have a programmatic section, an operational section, and a governance section. So really quickly, I'm just going to jump into the programming parts, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know what our slides are like. So are we just sticking with this slide, Angela?
No, we have slides for each of the sections.
All right, Max, go to the next. There we go. All right. I know you sent them to me, and I know I didn't look at them that closely. Anyway,
it's fine. We got you.
All right. But look what I have, everybody. I have the actual plan in what's called paper copy plan with my notes. So when we look at the programmatic plan, the real key here was to align what Annie and Angela just identified with you and with our session and what came out of the planning session with what is realistic. And so what we've recommended is that over the course of several years, SEND become very engaged in these 6 areas: revolving loan funds, a food systems loan fund, a micro fund for food, credit enhancement, loan guarantees, and the new markets tax credit program. These will help you capture access to capital tools, investment tools, and bedrock tools like bond finance. And it's kind of really important that each of these tools are very different. And so when we talk about revolving loan funds, and Max, if you want to, you do whatever you want with the slides, I'm just going to talk to the plan. When you think about revolving loan funds, these are self-replenishing pools of capital that lend to borrowers at more flexible and efficient rates and terms. These can be set up in a number of different ways. We're recommending that SEND set up two specific revolving loan funds. The first is the Food Systems Loan Fund. This is obviously a more broad-based lending pool. We're recommending it's about a $3 million loan fund, making loan amounts anywhere from $25,000 to $150,000. And you can use this resource for working capital, machinery, equipment, land and building, facade and land improvements, and possibly energy updates. We would allow this loan fund to be a co-lender along other financial institutions. So you may actually create this fund and it won't be 100% lending to projects. It could be lending a portion that the bank won't cover taking, which means that this fund would take a second position, which is a unique tool that gives banks more flexibility to lend if this fund would take a second position. We want this to be about a $3 million loan fund, so SEND would have to go out and capitalize it and build it up. But this is a very generic and general food system loan fund. Our next fund is a little more narrow because, as Annie indicated, microenterprises and some of the data we got out of this, there's a need for supporting smaller entrepreneurs or microenterprises, any company with 5 or fewer employees. And so we recommend a fund of about $500,000 to $1 million, where you would do small loans of $5,000 to $25,000. Again, these would be shorter terms, 1 to 3 years, and you'd allow working capital, machinery, equipment, and facade improvements. But mostly this would allow for non-traditional forms of collateral. There would be a limited or low application or limited or very low application fees, meaning there's not barriers to the borrower getting $5,000 to $25,000. And the borrower would pay an end of term success fee paid based on their repayment history. Now, what that means is you may have a rate, a very low or insignificant rate. It may be a 0% rate on the interest. But what would happen is that if that borrower makes their payments throughout the entire portion of the loan period, at the end, they would pay one more payment, which is equivalent to or close to a success fee or a rate that's shows that they have achieved what you asked them to do as a borrower. And so the reason you structure a program like that is it keeps the cost of the loan down for the borrower, but it lets them always know at the end they're going to have to pay a fee based on your willingness to give them access to capital. This is a higher risk, at-risk loan fund, and it's one that you have to be comfortable with losing a larger percentage of your loans. But these can be catalytic because the idea is you get the borrower through this loan fund and you send them to the big food system loan fund to grow their business. We also want you to look at credit enhancement. SEND and the surrounding communities have the ability to use their ratings and the ratings of their agencies as a form of credit enhancement. We also think that you could use capital from SEND or from other sources to create a credit enhancement model. And what that means is, let's say that Lincoln wants to issue tax-exempt bonds for development projects like manufacturers or first-time farmers, or you want to do it with your state Aggie bond program. SEND would provide a credit enhancement model. We think about a $3 million credit enhancement program where SEND would credit enhance up to 25% of a deal, meaning they would basically back a small portion of a transaction using their fund. You can use these on all private activity bonds, contingent that the bonds are used for the food system. So your processors, your nonprofits, your manufacturers, your first-time farmers, maybe energy or infrastructure deals for farming or for agriculture. And you're using your ability to credit enhance that transaction to get bond issuers to behave in a different manner, which is to lend to these borrowers. There'd also be a fee involved in that, which is great because that fee would help come back to SEND to not only populate the fund, but to also pay for your cost to run the fund. The next tool, and probably the tool that I think is most apt to be put in place sooner rather than later, is a loan guarantee model. So loan guarantee models are becoming more and more acceptable and, quite frankly, more and more mainstream, because this is money that you put at risk, but that you never actually have to hand over. So let's say SEND goes out and works with foundations or the university or a handful of donors to give a couple $1 million, and they raise a few $1 million for a loan guarantee program. Those donors never actually give the money, they commit the money. Then through their lending programs, SEND does loans for food-based businesses, or banks do loans for food-based businesses, and they can enroll those loans in a guarantee program. A guarantee program can be anywhere from guaranteeing 10% of the loan or 100% of the loan. SEND would create their structure. At CDFA, we operate an $18 million loan guarantee program that is backed by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. No, we don't have $18 million. That would be nice. But what we have is a piece of paper that says that we can work with development agencies to enroll loans into the loan guarantee program. And if those loans go bad, then the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation will guarantee a portion of that repayment. And Robert Wood Johnson isn't putting any actual cash into a bank account. They're just offering a line of guarantee that's available to us to access on behalf of borrowers. It's a crazy, amazing kind of program, and it's something that SEND could put in place pretty efficiently. And then the last piece of our programmatic element here is to look at the new markets tax credits. Nebraska in general is a underserved new markets area. That's not surprising entirely because it is so rural and it is largely a huge agrarian economy. And so what we would encourage SEND to do is to begin to build relationships with your national and regional CDFIs and those organizations that get allocation for tax credits, new market tax credit. And once you have those relationships in place, you begin to pipeline projects in the food system towards those CDEs or CDFIs that have allocation. Establishing a really strong relationship means that you could put projects that are 2 or 3 years away in the pipeline and could actually access new markets tax credits for those projects. I serve on the National New Markets Fund, which is a CDFI out of Oregon, but we're a national group. And we take projects all the time that apply to our funds and we put them in the pipeline. Now, they might not get funded in year 1 or year 2, they might be 3 years down, but what we're able to do is pipeline that project to access new markets. This is an area where, quite frankly, SEND could corner the market. The 16-county region could be, you could be the driver of that kind of capital into the region. And so that kind of covers the programmatic and the finance programs that we think SEND should focus on for the next several years. Should we go to the next set of slides, Angela? Yep, okay. So the next set of slides, oops, sorry, I moved on. So is this some more under programming? Got it. The next thing is to not only think about the capital and the programs you're running, but to also think about how you want to build your engagement in this space. And so when we think reframe, build, plan, you know, now you're starting to build these relationships. So build a technical assistance provider network. There are all sorts of technical assistance providers throughout not only the SEND district, but also throughout Nebraska, but throughout the national landscape. Those are both groups that focus on food and agriculture, but also groups that focus on business planning and finance and development. We want SEND to create a lender forum, a redevelopment gathering, an entrepreneurial event, and an annual celebration of food and finance, bringing people together, creating opportunities for food to meet finance, and really being that network of technical assistance providers. That also goes on to talk about organizing and hosting educational opportunities. You know, talking to your food networks, your food system network about finance is important. I have been blown away over the years by the amount of, you know, great food systems efforts that have no finance component to them whatsoever. And it's actually how like Angela and I met years ago. Was she was hosting and convening Food Network conversations, and she said, we should probably talk about finance a little bit. And suddenly I'm involved, and that makes sense that there should be food and finance in the same room. But having conversations around education is really important, and SEND could host these through the University of Nebraska, as a matter of fact, to have conversations about how food and finance and business and economy and economic development and infrastructure all work. And I'll throw a bone out there. We'd be happy to help teach it. If there's opportunities down the roads for CDFA to play a role in that, that would be great. You know, we think that SEND has an opportunity to become a one-stop shop for food financing. The question that we had when we were leaving there was, who's on first? You know, if a beginning farmer wants to start a farm, who do they go talk to? If a food entrepreneur wants to start a business, who do they go talk to? If a restaurateur wants to open a new restaurant, who do they go to? If there's an existing manufacturer or baker or brewery and they want to expand and grow, who do they go talk to? Where do they start? And so we think SEND can be that, become the one-stop shop. Learn about financing, identify what resources are best suited to help with your business needs, and then make those appropriate technical assistance connections and financing connections to introduce those businesses and entrepreneurs to the system of finance. And then lastly, under programmatic is to launch a project funding marketplace. And this is an idea that maybe once or twice a year, you get groups together that have ideas and projects that need funding and bring them together with your food system finance people. You can have that be regional, national, by state, but bring everybody online, talk about projects that need financing and funding, and see if you can be a matchmaker and actually brokering transactions between borrowers and who have needs and lenders who want to invest in projects. Max, next slide. And then the last item here is to develop, for programming, is to develop your direct technical assistance, creating an intake system. Like I said earlier, an entrepreneur or a business or a borrower comes to you. What is the intake process? What is the touch point for you to take that person and to walk them to the technical assistance providers or the lenders or the networks? And an intake system is going to be a real functional element. It's not pretty and it's not, you know, something that the world sees, but for SEND, you know what your intake system would be for how you bring those opportunities into your network or into your efforts. And then lastly, under programmatic is just continued engagement. If you take this plan and put it on a shelf, that will be disappointing, but what really needs to happen is a continued conversation and a continued engagement. Now, you know, SEND has been great to work with since day one. They're dedicated to food systems. They understand that Southeast Nebraska is largely agricultural driven, but they also understand the issues and the challenges. And so the next element will be continuing this engagement and building it and pushing it and getting that snowball rolling beyond this conversation. So that's all the programmatic stuff. I finally got to the end of the programmatic stuff. Let's go to operations. So there's some things you need to consider, and we're not going to delve too deeply in all of this because the strategic plan lays out some of our suggestions and our strategies. But one thing to know is that you're going to have all sorts of staffing needs. SEND already has some expertise in lending, so that's really good. But you're going to have to understand your loan funds and your credit enhancement programs. You're going to have people that have specific expertise. You're going to need to do convening activities and build additional resources. You'll have organizational needs. Organizational needs will be things that you have to put in place, like online platforms, intake systems, all the stuff that is required to operate a really robust type of program. You're going to have to need a capitalization strategy. I've mentioned several funds and programs that we suggest you put in place, but how are you going to capitalize those? What is the strategy behind going after philanthropy and corporate, going after your banks, your economic development agencies, your private sector investors who might be willing to invest, and your federal resources? Obviously, you know, SEND got a lot of resources through the CARES Act or ARPA or other resources, but now you got to go out and rebuild some of those. And then the last element is just understanding that if you're going to run finance programs, you have to have a really good management system in place. This includes marketing, intake, decision-making process, applications, risk and portfolios and profiles of what you're willing to do and not do, and then maintenance of your programs in the event of loss reserves, lost revenues or lost loans, and how you'll process and manage that. Excuse me. All right, next one, governance, Max. I'm gonna take a drink, hold on. All right, the last element of this is governance, things to consider. How will you onboard this? How will you onboard this plan? How will you onboard this strategy? Thinking about ways in which, ways in which you roll out the plan and roll out programs. You'll have to think about your guidelines, how you're going to measure outcomes. What does risk really mean to SEND? And then all of your operational procedures will have to be in place. A couple of things that you should note in there is that, outcomes are measured differently by everyone. If you expect to help 1,000 businesses in 2 years, that's not a realistic outcome. But when you build your programs and you build your structures, understanding that small wins lead to bigger wins over time will be important. And really understanding all the structure and the procedural process for how you're going to do all this will be really important. And so with that, I think we've covered the main elements of the plan. Did I get that all right, Angela?
Yeah, the only thing left was the timeline.
Right,
This
so
is
let's
the
go
next
to
slide.
the next slide. So, when we look at a timeline, we have short, mid, and long-term goals. Under the short-term goals, in the next year or two, launch your 1 or 2 loan funds. Offer your credit enhancement options and build those, and build a network of food system practitioners and economic development professionals. The mid-years are 3 to 4, launch additional loan funds, do your online portal and become that one-stop shop, and then begin to provide educational opportunities to teach the food system about finance and vice versa. And then long-term, it's creating a project funding marketplace and pipeline, engaging your networks and connecting to additional resources. Of course, this doesn't incorporate everything that's in this plan. Some things will move faster or slower, but this gives you a realistic idea of how long this process will be. We look at strategic plans as 5, 7, 10 years. And so you really want to invest in meeting short-term goals, meeting midterm goals, and aiming for these long-term achievements. And so now with that, I'll turn it back to Angela, who's going to proctor the remainder of this, I believe.
Okay, thanks, Toby. Max, we can stop sharing now because we would like to open it up to you all now that we've gone through a lot of information for you, and see if you have any comments, questions, just items for discussion. We're interested in hearing some feedback and what your thoughts are.
Hey, Angela, this is Tom. Lots of great information, Toby. Every time you talk, I get really motivated. And then I kind of hit the wall of the wall of reality. So I see the timeline. What are some good sources for those locally controlled, locally owned revolving loan funds? I know we've applied to USDA, we've applied to EDA. What are some other options for those?
I think there's probably 3 really good ones. And it's funny, Tom, I would actually say the federal ones are not a great option right now because they're so restricted and they're so limited and they're so hard to get. But I would look at like 3 major options. The first one is to look at your philanthropic community, and not just the foundations and the philanthropic groups in Nebraska, but I would look bigger picture. If you took this plan to like a Kellogg Foundation or a Kresge or a Ford or a Cerdna, or even the ones in your state, and say, listen, we're not asking for $100 million. We're asking for $1 million, $2 million to seed these funds to capitalize this. And we have an actual plan behind it. You're going to get a good response from that. It's not going to be a turnaway response. Looking specifically at foundations in your state, this is a really good chance to reset with them and have them think about ways in which they could be more value add, direct impact investing in your community. So that's one. The second one I would look at is take a deep dive look at your banking industry. There's something called the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, where banks are required by law to make, investments in the states and the cities and the counties where they take deposits. Look at all the banks in Nebraska and decide if they're making those reciprocal deposits. And if not, and you can look these online, there's a whole CRA evaluation. You can go to your banks and say, why don't you seed a loan fund as your CRA commitment this year or the next 2 years and seed our micro loan fund? And they will do that because they're obligated by law to do those investments. And they always laugh because nobody asks them. So they end up donating. Like if you ever see like the half marathon is supported by, Ohio Bank, it's because Ohio Bank has to provide, they have to invest in their communities. So they give that as a CRA donation. And then the third one is, and this is harder, I understand, your state, your counties are getting a lot of federal resources, ARPA money, grants, SSBCI. I would really work hard talking to your states, to your counties about everybody chipping in. 16 counties putting in $100,000 is $1.6 million right there. You just created your loan fund for a 16 county region. And that's not that far-fetched. It's just going to take a little bit of time to build that. And maybe a fourth one would be to maybe look at some of your industry, go to some of your industry groups, your farming and agriculture associations and business associations. A lot of them are sitting on a lot of cash right now, and they might be a good place to start a loan guarantee program to get them to commit some of their capital to a guarantee. And so I think there's a lot of good opportunities right now.
So Toby, on a follow-up to that then, if you do apply to or do approach local banks, local jurisdictions, industry groups, do you almost do like a pay-to-play type of thing? Or
no,
just if
it's a real direct thing. I mean, if we would look, and I could look eventually and give you some direction on it, but like if we would look at the banks in your state, they get a CRA rating, and we could even see what it is. And this is true. If you ever want to scare a banker, walk in, say, I want to have a meeting with your bank branch, president, and they'll say, no, we're busy. And say, I want to talk about CRA. They'll suddenly have a conversation with you because that's a real serious federal requirement. And so what I would say is study those banks, study all your banks, the big banks, the small banks, to see where they rank on the CRA requirements, and then have legitimate direct conversations. We're looking to raise $3 million for a loan fund. You have CRA requirements. Can we talk about making your next CRA investment in our loan fund? And just being really, really honest with them. The bankers laugh about it. Nobody asks. Nobody comes and puts them on the spot. And so that's a good way to get your bankers involved.
Toby, this is Tim Renna. I'm the co-chair of the Mayor of Lincoln's Community Committee on Local Food, and we put our draft of our local food system master plan on the mayor's desk a week ago this past Monday.
Awesome.
And she read it the same day and actually came back and had some suggestions, which delayed our release of the plan. She actually wanted it stronger than it is.
Nice.
All right. And so it's hard to turn that down. She is, of course, running for re-election, and the general election is in May. And we're afraid that, if she isn't returned, that this could come to a screeching halt. But assuming she does get reelected, all right, we've got a mayor that's very interested in this. But what we don't have is any of the on-the-ground infrastructure of where we go to get money. So you were talking before about how magical it was that CDFA and SEND found each other when they found each other and so forth. I'm looking at this from the point of view of magic of the city of Lincoln found you guys, okay? And I don't want to put SEND in any sort of box that they don't want to be in, but I don't see anybody else that could do what you guys have already done. I mean, if indeed this plan is adopted by the city council and placed in the city's comprehensive plan, which is the goal, we won't even know where to start.
Yeah.
We'll have a plan, but all of this stuff takes money. And if it doesn't take direct dollars and so forth, it takes, staffing infrastructure so that you get the right people talking to each other. So I just want to thank all of you for what you have done, because it's like you are a glimmer of light in a very dark night. And it's, if people turn to me and say, well, okay, Tim, it's adopted, now what? And I say, talk to SENDD, talk to SENDD, let's go talk to SENDD. Okay. And I'm hoping, Tom, okay, and I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I want you guys to know that I think there's a void out there, and I can't think of anybody else better equipped to fill it than you folks.
Well, Tim, let me just say, congrats on getting your mayor behind a food plan. That's pretty awesome. And we hope she gets reelected for your sake on that front. But also, yeah, I mean, that's great. And don't forget, we're still here, guys. Like, we don't go away. We've got 3 more years of funding from Kellogg, and we do want to see some action. So kind of to Tim's point, SENDD's in a good spot to keep the snowball rolling on this, but it's going to take some work, and it's going to take more than just one person being vocal. It's going to take all of you being vocal and saying, yes, SENDD is the right group. So I love your energy, Tim. And if we can help in any way, oh, by the way, send us the plan, your plan, when you're done, because we'll promote it. We'll tell people what you guys did. Yeah.
Deal.
Yeah. Cool. Angela, anything else?
Yeah. No, great questions, comments, Tim, congratulations. Any other questions, comments, thoughts from anybody else?
Hi, this is Ben Jewell. A couple different times you all mentioned the need to educate lenders about system financing. Can you just expand on that a little bit? What is that? What kind of things would they need to be educated on? Who typically does that well?
Yeah, I would call that forward and reverse education. I think the first element of and we've done this a little bit with some communities. The first element is to not accuse them of not financing the food system. They don't like that, right? But to actually sit down and say, hey, could you tell us examples of where you do finance the food system and how you look at the food system? And then they'll say, I don't know what the food system is, but we did a restaurant last week and we did a food processor a month ago. So you want to start by having them tell you what they do. Then the second piece is to say, can we educate you a little bit on what we see as the food system, agriculture, institution, infrastructure, industry, entrepreneurs, social needs, or social objectives, and to get them thinking a little more broadly. And then before we pounce on them to start doing more finance, we say, where do these fall into your credit box, into your evaluation? They'll probably be honest with you and say, hey, we just don't do them because they're risky. Well, that's when you start talking about risk and debunking risk and what does risk mean. And it's just a slow process. But in reverse, what's happening is they're also educating you on their mindset, on how they think about food system projects. They think restaurants are risky. They don't understand how to finance breweries. They don't do farming because of this, that, and that. So it begins to give you an idea of what you need to work on with them in changing that language and that narrative. And then the bigger part is let them talk. Like when they do deals, when they do a food processor, when they do a farmer, when they do a restaurant, expose that so that they can see that the world cares about those things and that they're really important. They love to be able to talk about their transactions. So it's forward education in reverse, but it starts by asking them to talk about what they do and what they don't do and why, and to tell them why they don't. And 90% of the time, they're going to say, nobody brings us those deals. Nobody brings those to us. We didn't know you wanted us to do more, food manufacturers and processors because nobody brings us those transactions. And so it's really like relationship building and forward and reverse education.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah. Like the big bad banker, everybody, they're not big bad banker. They need opportunity. If it's not brought to them, they're not going to do it. I mean, why would they? And so it's about like opening their eyes to that opportunity out there.
Toby, I have to jump in one more time. This question is absolutely pertinent to what we're dealing with right now. One of the things that the mayor said that we're missing is that we don't have enough engagement from the business community. And she's right, but we tried to get it. All right, we reached out to the Chamber of Commerce over and over again. Talk to us about this. Get in at the ground floor, share your thinking on all this. And while we were working on our plan, they were working on theirs. It's called Vital Lincoln. It's for the next 20 years or something like that. All right, so it calls for building a new convention center. Okay, they're supporting, a new beltway around the city so that we can have the internal combustion engine go on forever. Okay, I mean, they're doing that, but they would not talk to us, and because it just wasn't a high enough priority for them. We weren't on their radar, and we weren't the people to do it. Having an entity like SEND would be absolutely essential so that we get folks that are all in the financial world sitting down and chatting over a cup of coffee about it. This is a case where we have to find the right people to talk to the right people. And
I think you're right.
And I'm counseling that if the mayor wants the engagement from the Chamber of Commerce, she's going to have to call them personally and say, well, this is really important to me. This is important to the city of Lincoln. We need your input on all of this. We need your help. And I think if we don't have that, we're not going to move forward, because right now there is a disinclination. I would have thought the fact that 90% of our food dollar leaves the state of Nebraska would be enough impulse to get the business community to say, we should recapture some of that stuff. We should be doing some of this ourselves and so forth, but it's not registering yet. And
it has been amazing to watch economic developers not realize that multipliers on food are pretty significant when you can keep that dollar locally. I mean, those multipliers they're huge, but they're worried about all this other big picture stuff, and they sometimes don't see that the food economy is as big picture as it gets. Reinforcing how big this is. That's all part of Reframe food systems as infrastructure and economic development, just as important as outer belts and convention centers, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your questions and comments, and we're really excited to finally launch the plan, and looking forward to seeing implementation and how things go. So I guess if there are no other questions, comments, Tom, Kelly, any closing?
I do have a question.
Oh, okay.
This is Gail Pullman. I am on the SEND board. You emphasized the staffing. So let's suppose we're able to come up with some money with some pretty good revolving loan funds. How much staffing, and is there a quality level of staffing that is needed for something like this, kind of beyond a grant writer type person?
Yeah, great question, Gail. A $1.5 million loan fund will be support that. If you have a $1.5 million loan fund lending out, the fees and the income from that loan fund will support a full-time staff person. So you have to think about it like you need at least one full-time person on $1.5 million, $2 million loan fund. So if you get one of these, you are definitely going to need a full-time person on that. Now that might sound overwhelming or complicated. It's not. It's one person managing a loan fund, but they have a set of resources available to them for the process, like a loan committee and underwriting process and whatnot, and vendors that help with certain elements. Now, in terms of what kind of person, yeah, you need a person that has loan fund management, credit analysis, experience, and that is difficult to find right now. I'm not going to lie to you. That's difficult to find right now. Because of everything that's happened in the last, 5-6 years. But those people absolutely do exist. Shameless plug. If you get someone without a lot of experience, we can teach them. I mean, we teach 2 revolving loan fund courses, how to run them all. But that person does need a level of sophistication beyond just admin. It's got to be someone that can run and process it. But having said that, I have seen all sorts of people run loan funds, and it's just about attention to detail and running them properly. If you had a number of funds, that's even better, because you can share that person across a number of funds and actually have people that do the marketing, people that do the underwriting, and have a couple of team members. And I think, Angela, we have some of that in the plan, but also we have other resources down the line for you all, books and publications and best practices and how to run loan funds. But SEND already kind of knows how to do some of that.
Yeah, we put links to additional resources at the end of the plan on all of the different financing tools that we recommend. So there's a lot more information that you can read about in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So Angela, before we go, I just wanted to mention to everybody, we will be telling the world about what SEND is doing. You know, I think we're going to put a big old announcement out and everything. Angela, we got plans for that?
Yep, that's happening. Everything goes out on Friday. So we wanted to wait for
great.
this event for these folks, and then the official announcement goes out. So yep.
We've also told the Kellogg Foundation, and they've signed off on all this, and they're excited about it, and they've told us it's great work. And so, I mean, hold your head up high, SEND. You guys are one of 2 communities that have ever done this, and we're pretty proud of you. So thank you so much.
Okay. Well, with that, then thank you all for attending and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank